In astrology, I find that when people are first learning astrology, they're not aware of the multitude of ways in which a planet can create something. For instance, most people will generally, look at a planet like, let's say, Jupiter, for instance, and they know that Jupiter can be an indicator for children. So that's one concept. They might know that Jupiter can be an indicator for spouse for women. That's another step. They usually know that Jupiter will be responsible for certain houses in the horoscope. That's another angle on it. But there are several other ways that planets can create particular agendas. And I actually have a course on concrete prediction with Vimshotri Dasha. And we cover many of these concepts on that particular course. That's available at the Pulse of the Universe Academy of Vedic Astrology, where you can register for either a certification membership or a non-certification membership. And the all courses, non-certification memberships, and the bronze level memberships are available with a 2-day free trial. But what I thought I'd do first is take us into a chart where I can show you some of these concepts and give you some ideas in terms of how you might be able to see the multitude of things that a planet can in fact produce. Here we have a self-created chart. What do I mean by that? I mean that I can create humans in my little laboratory inside of my astrology software. I'm only kidding, but that is kind of what you do when you just create a random chart. And so here we have a random chart that I've created where we have a really strong Jupiter. And I thought I would use this as an example, along with something called the mutual agenda table from Kala, in order to point out the various agendas that a planet can have that many people usually don't even know about. So one thing I want to talk to you about is I do a lot of work with house cusps. I'm going to try to give you a simple explanation within the realm of the Vedic system of astrology and how I work with it, about how I work with these concepts. House cusps, as per the techniques I use, are finite, very defined points, degree points in a particular Rashi that represent a particular house. They're different in concept to the concept of equal houses. Okay, and I'm going to explain how these two concepts are different just by illustrating a particular point. So let's look at Jupiter, for instance. If you know your Vedic astrology, then you're going to know that Jupiter, as per equal houses, would rule the third equal house here, and it would also rule the 12th equal house here. But what's that number 2 all about? Well, that number 2 is the second house cusp. So that gives Jupiter a second house agenda. Jupiter's responsible for the second house. Now, in your mind, you're likely going, so which is it? Is Jupiter responsible for the second house, or is it responsible for the third house in this instance? In fact, it's responsible for both, as we're going to show you here. It's responsible for the third equal house and the second house cusp, both of which can create third house and second house energy. So we're working with those two side by side. And when a planet is strong enough to create something, right, then it can produce that event. And when you go further down in the dasha chain and you see that planets share an agenda for a specific event, like let's say, for instance, we're looking at Jupiter dealing with the second house, and we find another planet that perhaps has second house agenda, and it also is strong enough to produce it, then the dasha of Jupiter with the sub period of that second planet can produce wealth, right? It's a simple concept that becomes complex at first when you first begin to practice it, but it becomes easier over time when you become more adept with the system. But back to our concept of second and third house for Jupiter and the 12th house. So that means, for instance, that Jupiter has responsibility for the second, the third, and the 12th house cusp. Now, I'm going to try to move this chart down a little bit so I can illustrate a few points and see if I can avoid losing Jupiter. I did avoid losing Jupiter. That's good. But if I did lose Jupiter, I'd find it pretty quickly because Jupiter is a pretty big planet and all I'd have to do is go looking for it. But I digress. So let's get back to the horoscoping case. Okay. So a planet obviously can produce something by having a responsibility for its houses. In this instance, we're going to start with house cusps. Okay. So Jupiter, as you can see, rules the second house cusp and it rules the 12th house cusp. And if you go over here to your mutual agenda table, you'll see Jupiter has a responsibility for the second and the 12th houses. But did you know that Jupiter also has an agenda for the first house? See if you can figure out how it does that. Okay, I'll tell you because you can't respond to me, and otherwise I'd just be sitting here and we'd have a really quiet video. Jupiter rules Saturn. So because Jupiter rules Saturn, because Saturn's in Pisces and Saturn rules the ascendant, Jupiter can produce the first house, as you'll see in this table over here, because it's ruling Saturn. Jupiter is also the third and the 12th equal house lord. Okay. In the table in Kala, it's called the Rashi lord. That's so we can distinguish between a house cusp and an equal house. And if you scroll down, you'll see Jupiter has responsibility for the third and 12th houses by ruling the third equal house and the 12th equal house. Okay. But remember, Jupiter also rules Saturn. And because Jupiter rules Saturn, Saturn will have responsibility for certain equal houses too. And so if you look here, Saturn rules the first equal house and the second equal house. Okay, so as you can see, Jupiter has responsibility to the second house, the 12th house cusp, the first house, the third and the 12th houses, and the first and the second house. So we can say Jupiter, if it's strong enough, can produce first house things, it can produce second house things, it can produce third house things, and it can produce 12th house things. Let's talk about what some of those things are. The third house can deal with travel. The 12th house can deal with foreign countries. That means that Jupiter can produce foreign travel potentially, right? Second house can deal with wealth. 12th house can deal with loss, right? So Jupiter here can equally deal with loss of resources or loss of wealth, but that's less likely in this instance because Jupiter is exalted. It might deal with enough resources to go take a vacation, which is another 12th house thing and 12th house thing. And we did, after all, see the third and the 12th house factors. One factor we missed in this equation is Jupiter as the Darakaraka. So that gives Jupiter a 7th house agenda as well. So we're seeing first, second, third, 7th, and 12th for Jupiter. Jupiter also disposits Saturn, who's the Bratrukaraka. So Jupiter can produce siblings. The Bratrukaraka can also be responsible for travel. It's also responsible for associates, colleagues at work. So Jupiter can produce all those things by ruling Saturn. Now, Jupiter's also going to have an agenda by being a Rashi lord from another planet or from another Karaka. So for instance, here we're looking at the Rashi chart. So we want to really look at the self-related factors, and looking at these self-related factors will give us an idea of the multitude of things that might be going on in the person's life during their Jupiter dasha. So we want to look especially at the positions that Jupiter has a responsibility for from the sun, which is the karaka for self, as well as the atmakaraka, which is the other karaka for self. Okay, the atmakaraka in this instance is Mercury, and the sun's the sun, as we know. Okay, so Jupiter, if you find the sun here, you'll see that Jupiter rules the third and the sixth equal houses from the sun. So Jupiter can also produce third and sixth house things, or delays in travel, or difficulty with colleagues. All of those things can be created through Jupiter's relationship to the sun, even when you're not in a sun-related antardasha, but most especially when you are in a sun-related antardasha. Okay? So from the Atmakaraka, Mercury, Jupiter rules the fourth and the seventh. Okay, that the fourth being home, seventh being relationships. When you combine those two together, the seventh house also deals with foreign countries, believe it or not. So the person may live abroad during their Jupiter dasha. That's another potential that can factor into the equation. Jupiter also can rule a Rashi Lord from a particular planet, or rule an equal house Lord from a particular planet. So remember, what does Jupiter rule in this horoscope? It rules Saturn. So we want to look at basically what equal house Lord Jupiter rules from the sun. Okay, and what we'll see in this particular instance is Saturn rules the fourth and the fifth from the sun. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay, so fourth and fifth house matters can be produced. Home-related matters, equally children, those can be common things during Jupiter Dasha, especially because Jupiter is a character for children. The child-related thing can come more to the surface. Let's see what Jupiter rules, Jupiter's rulership of Saturn is connected with from Mercury, right? Mercury is the Atmakaraka, remember. So Saturn rules the fifth and the sixth from Mercury, right? So that can relate to difficulty with children. So in short, from our examination so far, we can see Jupiter has first, second, third, and 12th agenda. The third house is going to become more prominent because of Jupiter's rulership of Saturn. We're going to see that it also has sixth agenda coming to the surface because of being the sixth Rashi Lord from the sun. We'll see that it has fourth house agenda because of ruling Saturn, which is the fourth Lord from the sun. It also has fifth house agenda by ruling Saturn, which is the fifth Lord from the sun. And Jupiter will have seventh house agenda by being the Darakaraka, as well as ruling the seventh from Mercury, the Atmakaraka. Jupiter has a seventh agenda that way. Jupiter, through ruling Saturn, can create fifth house agenda, as well as creating sixth house agenda, because Saturn's the fifth and the sixth Lord from the Atmakaraka. So much going on in the horoscope that you may not have known about just from one single planet. But guess what? It doesn't stop there. So Jupiter and Mercury, as per Jaimini astrology, have a special function where they can manifest factors that they come into contact with, either by conjuncting that factor in the horoscope or by Rashi aspecting that factor in the horoscope. So let's start with the concept of conjunction. Jupiter here is joining the seventh. Jupiter can manifest relationships for the person because it joins the seventh. Jupiter Rashi aspects the second equal house. So Jupiter can create second house agenda. Remember how you were seeing the second agenda here? That becomes stronger now. Remember how you were seeing the seventh agenda here because of Jupiter is the Darakaraka? That becomes stronger now. Okay. Jupiter also Rashi aspects the third, fourth, and fifth house cusps, and that's the fifth equal house. So Jupiter can manifest third house things and fourth house things. When you combine the third and the fourth together, you get a traveling home. which is another way of saying the person might move home. And you also get the fifth house in the equation. So that can deal with something related to children. All those things become strengthened, most especially because we're now seeing them twice. Okay. Jupiter also Rashi aspects the ninth, 10th, and 11th house cusps, as well as the 11th equal house. So Jupiter now has a ninth house agenda that we didn't see before. It also has a 10th house agenda for creating a career that we didn't see before. And it also has an 11th house agenda for gains and for aspirations that we didn't see before. So all of those things get highlighted now too. So now we have a 9th, 10th, and 11th house agenda. So in addition to that, Jupiter Rashi aspects Venus, who's the 3rd, 4th, and 5th house cusp lord, and the 10th equal house lord. So Jupiter can manifest all those things through Venus. Jupiter also Rashi aspects Mars, which is the 4th, 9th, 10th, and 11th lord. So Jupiter can manifest all those things now too. So your mind is likely going to be going at this particular point, goodness gracious, that's too much to look at. And you might be going, right, well, it looks like Jupiter can create pretty much every single house in the horoscope. And, you would find, I haven't gone through and kind of written down every single one of them, but you might find in many instances that a planet does that. So then how to know which of those things that it creates? That is determined by confluence primarily. Like for instance, we saw Jupiter as the Darakaraka. It's also conjuncting the 7th. It's also Rashi aspecting Venus, which is a relationship planet. So the relationship concept gets strengthened by those things, right? We also saw the 3rd house being activated a few times, so that can relate to siblings, possibly moving home. That's another concept that can happen through Jupiter's dasha. Those things get accentuated because they appear more than once. And on my concrete prediction course, we talk about the concept of mutual agenda, which means if you're in a dasha, as I was saying earlier, and an antardasha period, where two planets share the agenda for a specific concept in the horoscope, then that factor has the potential to get created. Let's see if I can point out a very good example for you. Let's look at Mercury in this instance. Mercury has a 7th house agenda, as well as Jupiter. So in Jupiter Mercury, the agenda for creating a relationship becomes stronger because both of those planets have the agenda for the 7th house. 9th house shows here too. So 9th house matters can get created, like entrepreneurship, because Mercury is the Atmakaraka, which can be a karaka of career. So the concept here is that when you have a dasha and an antardasha period coming together, they join together to create a particular thing. And they create the agendas that are shared by both of them. Now, this is just scratching the surface on this. I go much more into depth with this concept and teach you how to predict using the concept of mutual agenda on the concrete prediction course with Vimshotri Dasha, which is available at the Pulse of the Universe Academy of Vedic Astrology. You can register for several different memberships there. There are certification memberships that give you certification in each of the courses. And there's also a non-certification membership if you just want to go there and watch videos. The all courses non-certification membership gives you access, obviously, to the courses on a non-certification basis, and you can get a free trial for 2 days with that membership. There's also the bronze level membership, which gives you access to all the video courses on the site on a certification basis, so that when you complete them, you get certified in that particular course. That also has a 2-day free trial. And the rest of the memberships, the silver, the gold, and the platinum membership, also give you access to some of my live webinar courses. So if you're interested, you can please visit the site that you will see linked in the video somewhere up above. Thanks a lot for watching this, and please do take the very best care of yourself. Look for a transit video to come out sometime soon. Bye now.